So what do you do? I hate that question. And so does today's guest, Charlie Rogers. Mainly because he very intentionally never chose a conventional life, so he doesn't have a conventional answer. He built and closed businesses, represented Great Britain as an endurance athlete, is a community builder, speaker, and now author. In today's conversation, we're talking about his story, the inherited beliefs that make you feel like you should be living life a specific way, and the ideas behind his new book, Undefinable Life Design. If you've ever felt too much for one box, this conversation's for you. Welcome to the Unemployment Diaries.
Yeah, happy to say that it feels good to put the book out there, to see the Amazon page, and I'm excited to share it properly with the world in 2 weeks' time when I put the paperback out as well.
Well, congrats. It's exciting. By the time this episode goes out, it will be live. The links will be available. And it totally makes sense that someone like you would write a book called Undefinable Life Design. Because when we first chatted, you're like, yeah, well, I built parcel boxes. And then I also supported Gen Z during the pandemic. Oh, and then by the way, I represented Great Britain as a triathlete. And then it makes total sense as to why it kind of irks you to hear that question, so what do you do, and expect a one-line answer. What is so problematic with that question?
That question asks the person receiving it to summarize all their parts of themselves into ideally a one-word answer, or perhaps, second preference, a sentence, when actually to a lot of us, to those of us who find ourselves interested in more than one thing, which I think is part of being human, dare I say it, then it's trying to delete parts of ourselves in that moment which we feel aren't fit towards that person's answer that they want. So say you're asked in a business context, what do you do? You're going to give the role or profession a lot quicker than you are being a dad, or having a love of the drums, or having an interest in a new area of space science. Like, you're going to say different things depending on different contexts. And that problem statement that's created by asking that question is that it requires you to condense your whole self into a simple answer, which doesn't do justice to the complexity of yourself.
Yeah, and why do you think we are so obsessed with these one-word answers? Like, we want to have a title or a label that very neatly sums us up. What is it about our psychology that makes us even want that?
Well, firstly, it's the idea that we're looking for a source of credibility to sort the noise from the signals. So we're looking across at, is that person worth listening to? Do they have some expertise in that domain that would actually be valuable to me? Particularly in a world where we're given so much information all the time, and some of it's not even real anymore, and a lot of it's AI slop. It's working out, okay, which one of this information is actually useful to me? So it's a series of quickly differentiating between useful and unuseful information. It also, in the past, has been a source of bias as well. If you see someone who's dressed sharp, looking good, and they say a one-word answer of being a lawyer, you're probably going to trust them a lot more than someone who gives, say, that they're an Uber driver or is dressed a lot differently as well. And so there's a lot of one-word answers that make us put our back up tight, that make us, reply a little bit sterner, or, have to give them an A game. And so having ourselves summarized into labels that demonstrate expertise can be quite useful for knowing which person to listen to, but it can also be quite limiting in that we only reveal parts of ourselves to them.
I mean, that makes sense. And this book, it's not your autobiography, but you do share quite a bit about yourself. And you have a very, let's say, unique, eclectic background. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, so my top level answer, my summary, should we say, before I go into depth, is that I've never worked a full-time role. I've done everything but that. And for me, there's always been this idea that there are different ways of working in the world, if only we learn how to negotiate them and show up for them. And so for myself, one of the biggest decision points that started this journey was when I was in second year at university and decided that I would take on what they called a year in enterprise. About 1% of the whole population of the business school could go and do a year in enterprise, starting their first business, and the rest would go on to placement. So for myself, decided to turn down a full-time role at a consulting company and instead take on this opportunity to start my first business. So I decided to build a parcel collection device that could attach to your house to receive deliveries when you're away. Called it Posty, and took that year out to go and build it, while also working part-time to be able to fund myself and my journey. And then got to the stage in my final year when I was like, to take this prototype and turn it into an actual real product requires crowdfunding, getting people behind it, doing an actual marketing campaign. And I looked at myself and I was like, do I want to sell parcel boxes for the next 5 years? And I thought, not quite. That's not really what I want to do. And so I closed that in March 2020. And then lo and behold, we all ended up at home for the next 2 years anyway. So the month afterwards, myself and one of my housemates, we decided to host an online hackathon where we brought together some of the students who we met along the way who just lost their graduate jobs, but also some of the businesses that I'd met from that year out. And that evolved from this really fun thing to do on a Saturday each month into this talent assessment day for startups where they could see young people in action working on real business problems. And so it was this really cool like win-win-win scenario of like you get experience by attending the event that you can then talk about anyway, and you might also get hired by companies whose problem you're working on that's really engaging and fun. And that was a really cool journey for the next year and a half. And then got to the end of 2021 and reflected and thought, do I want to continue this business post-pandemic in a hybrid world? Is quite a different business to bring it from a virtual event to an in-person event. And I also thought, I kind of want to do the next thing. So I closed that business, then went on a journey of figuring out what it meant to build a portfolio career, tried different things, and along that way kind of figured out my own golden thread and what I wanted to spend my time on. So that then led me to the path of deciding to join the Portfolio Collective, which is a community of 15,000 portfolio professionals, people with more than one source of income, and then was there for about a year and a half until the end of 24, mentored under two of the best mentors I've had, and they taught me all I used to know about portfolio careers and where the world was going. We also surveyed everyone. We found that people who were focused experts, who were known for one thing, that delivered many ways. So say if you were known for employment law that you then delivered workshops on, you were a speaker on, and you had one-to-one clients on, they earned twice as much as the freelancers who did many things, as the multi-hyphenates who had 2 part-time jobs. And with that insight, I thought, okay, how do I apply that? How do I take the learning that the focused expert in the portfolio career space is the one that earns the most and by virtue has the most time freedom to them? Alongside, I also was writing a newsletter. I turned that into a community called the Undefinable community at the beginning of 2023, and there were these people that were living beyond labels, who wanted to do many things, who I brought together from different parts of my life, who I found that could exist beyond this idea of just doing one thing. Like, we weren't a run club who just showed up and did runs and talked about running. We were Undefinables who loved everything about the world and did many different things. And so bringing them together and then thinking, how do I help these Undefinables who want to be everything to have the freedom and impact of the focused expert? That then became the genesis of the book and the whole world that followed.
So it seems like your journey has a lot of pivot points.
Yeah.
It wasn't one thing that you just stuck with. And it also wasn't totally disconnected. How did you get from when you would say something like, it felt like I needed to move on to the next thing?
Yeah.
What made you realize that that was what you needed to do?
For me, it was my obsession with growth at that time. So it was, how do I learn the most in the fastest way possible? That was always a kind of key driver for me. And once I felt that my learning had plateaued, I either had to find a new way of learning more in that space of, say, expanding a role scope or deciding in a new industry area or taking on a new challenge that could confront myself within the business or within the role, or I knew deep down that it was time to move on. I kind of decided that my 20s were for learning and my 30s were for earning. And so that became a kind of key mantra in my mind, is that if I'm not learning here, I've got to be earning here. And if I'm not doing that either, then it's time to find the next thing.
Gotcha. So you have a kind of guiding set of principles. Is that the golden thread you mentioned, or is that something else?
So the golden thread is the statement that brings together all that's interested me and that shows up for how I help others. So right now, the way I would describe it for myself is I help Undefinables, those who live beyond conventional labels, to design their lives for uniqueness. And I do that through intimate spaces, life design frameworks, and intentional transitions. And the products and services related to that are that I've obviously got a book, I do one-to-one coaching. I do life design days, designing an expedition in the future, which would be really cool. And I also run a non-profit Undefinable community for those in the age of discovery. 50 members, we do retreats, we do explorations, celebrations, and yeah, it all feeds one another and has a shared essence to it, but it also is very much sort of separate as well.
It makes sense that all of this is so, I'll use the word experiential and like participatory, because the book is very much that. It's an exercise. It's kind of a living, breathing thing. It's not you read it and then you apply it. It's like you read it, you set it down, you take some notes. You have an exercise where you have the reader, so I did this myself, write down all of their interests on sticky notes and then categorize them. And that alone makes you realize, I guess I have more interests than I thought I did. Because you kind of are used to your elevator pitch of who you are, and you think that that's all you are, whereas in fact there is so much more to it. And you have this line in the book that I'll paraphrase, but that you're not one thing forever, and you're not. Jump in.
It's not always one thing forever, and it's not always one thing at once.
Not always one thing at once, and that one thing forever bit really struck me, because I feel like we're still in the mindset of having the forever career or having the forever guiding light. And maybe that's kind of the old narrative of generations before us, where if your father was a carpenter, then you'd be a carpenter and your daughter would be a carpenter.
Yeah.
And it's just not the way it works anymore. What do you think's changing that makes it possible for us to be other things and pivot and change?
So the world is in an exponential age, actually the name of a book that's pretty good on this topic, and we're living in this rapidly growing, evolving world where technology only gets faster, and it gets faster, so it goes even more exponential. It's not linear. We often think that it happens in step changes, but actually the world we're experiencing, the growth in the last even 10 years is perhaps even twice the speed of the 20 years before that. So it's happening at an exponential rate, and so that is then affecting the roles that are available, the careers that are worth getting into, the impact that we could have versus different platforms that are available to us now, and the methods and tools that are relevant. And so we're experiencing this constant change of speed and velocity. And so anyone that is particularly in my own age group, I'm set in Gen Z, should we say, we have lived in a world of constant change, and we have this knowledge and this experience of, okay, the world today is going to be different from the world tomorrow. Like my dad has worked in the same role or the same company for 40 years. He worked from a bricklayer up to construction director. And like there's a deep sort of, admiration for that, of like, wow, this guy showed up in the same company for 40 years. But there's also a kind of, what would you do if you didn't have that role? Kind of question in my mind as well. And I think some of the recent experiences I've had with him have kind of made me question that more around like, what would you be without this role? Where would you go? What would you do with your time? And yeah, I think there's a respect level to people that are stuck at things for a long time. But there's also a kind of question around, are you able then to adapt to the world that's sort of shifted around you while you've been in that one company?
So going back to what you were saying about focused experts being the most successful financially, and then having this undefinable community that's interested in different things, how then do you marry the two?
So this is, the core question behind the book is, if you want to be many things, how would you do one thing? And that, in a lot of senses, starts with finding what their many interests are. So you imagine this as what I call Purpose Acropolis. This is the end destination of the undefinable ascent that I describe in the book. And it begins by gathering the raw materials of your many interests and looking at which ones were perhaps inherited, which ones did you get from your parents. And my dad used to call me Bob, and so Bob the Builder. He worked in construction for the 40 years, and so I definitely look at big infrastructure projects and think, wow, that's really cool. That's still part of me. And then there are outdated interests, ones that you used to do but aren't so involved in right now. Like a big part of me before was triathlon. I haven't been in the pool since I did the European Champs. Maybe that's a preference or what it was an interest of, but that was a part of me is less so a part of me now. And there are current interests, things that really engage me. So one of the interests I'm getting into a lot of is board games. I love pulling some off the shelf. There's one called Vantage, which is very good. And it's a first-person board game, which is a really cool concept.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's soon interests, ones that perhaps have booked for a weekend in the future. You have a weekend away or things that you know you've time allotted to. And then you have ideal interests, ones that you do if there was no money or time or self-belief obstacle behind it. So you look at all those interests and you find, okay, what are the common themes? How do I categorize them? And so for me, if I look at, I like running, hiking, triathlon, they're all part of this thing I call adventure sports. Okay, cool. So if the bigger domain here is adventure sports, I'd rather like go deep in adventure sports than I would go deep into one of those different interests. And so I now have the category of which to commit to. And that then becomes a foundation block. So if before we've gathered the raw materials, now we've put the foundation blocks in place. And then we look for what is the keystone, what is the key part that will hold the entire structure together. And that is where the golden thread comes in. So you look at these few categories that you've picked, ones that you can go semi-pro in. So rather than commit professionally to one single category, you commit to a few of them and go deep in that area. And then you uniquely combine them together in a way that only you can. And then you look for the person that you want to most help with those skills, and that then becomes your golden thread. And then you raise the roof around the keystone, and that is your signature expression. That is how you design experiences in the world, how you can create products or services in a way that's unique to you. So I know that for myself, like groups of 10, 12 is like a really great number for delivering a workshop or experience. And so I always focus on how I can achieve that throughout some of the group dynamics that I offer as well. I also call myself a guide, not a coach on one-to-one sessions. I don't have all the answers. I'm along beside you on the journey. So there's different ways of seeing the world that you can then bring to life. Then there's also, say, models or frameworks, as I'm describing to you right now, or in the Undefinables scent, that also forms part of the signature expression or the roof. And then you hold the structure together with the pillars of your many value streams. So some you might monetize directly. These might fuel your golden thread, so you might get paid for them. Yes, you can get paid in many ways. You might get paid per hour, per outcome, per equity. But also there are indirect ones that sustain you as well. So say your family, your friends, things that aren't monetized but are valuable to holding up your entire Acropolis. And that's the beginning of how you then design your life as an undefinable. And then you have to work towards that ideal life that sits atop the mountain, and you begin then at the bottom of the ascent, and you gather your energy toolkit and you navigate the income pathway towards it.
I love that you, excuse me, let me say that again. I love that you considered non-traditional career elements in this design, that it's not just about who you work for, why you work, the way you work, your skills. It's also the things that give you value, like family and those other pillars, social pillars that support your life journey. Have there been times in your own life where parts of this have been out of balance?
For sure. There's definitely been times where I've lent too hard on one pillar and the others I haven't given enough credit or enough time and attention to. I think the period that calls most to me on this is my time of going all in on sport. Well, all in the sense that it was 15, 20 hours a week of training, around also having a 4-day-a-week role, around also building a community, around also everything else that I was doing. And so that aspect of sport is that, yes, it might take 15, 20 hours a week of my time that I've done on Strava, but the amount of energy also consumes that you have to then eat more, sleep more, you have to rest and recover a lot more. That's also a lot of the unintended consequences of making some of those commitments too. And I've often felt along that journey that I then didn't have enough time to invite in like a meaningful relationship with a partner. I was thinking, how do I focus on sport versus how do I build a life with someone? And so I definitely forgave that more emotional side of myself while I was building the career, or I'm also building the sports part of me as well. And so there's definitely these trade-offs that you choose knowingly or unknowingly that you might then grow out of at a later date too. But I find that it can be somewhat rewarding when you commit to one of your categories for a while as like the pure focus. Like right now I'm in this pure focus of a book launch, but the other parts have to be sustaining at the same time. So when I now think of sport, I think of it as enabling me. So I think of 5 hours a week rather than 20 hours a week. And that is an outlet for stress, it's an outlet for health, versus it being how hard can I push myself, which was the question before.
So it seems like you have a great deal of awareness around the constraints in your life and the constraints that you're actively choosing versus the times when perhaps the constraint starts to develop as a result of an interest kind of becoming your identity, and then you kind of having to deal with it. And there's actually a quote from the book that I want to read because it really stopped me in my tracks. If you're still searching for purpose, start with designing your life for your uniqueness. Tune out the noise, listen inwards. Your clarity will come from choosing constraints, not from keeping every door open. It's in the limits you choose that your freedom begins. So what role do you think that constraints play in shaping your future?
I think they're vital. There's the constraints you choose and the ones you don't. And bringing as many into being intentional is the core part of being designing your life versus having your life be designed for you. Because there are a lot of things that we can choose how we respond to. Say there are parts that we might be given to us, so our parents might fall ill, we might have children without expecting to. They are constraints on our time that we perhaps didn't plan for, and even life can throw us our own illnesses or injuries that we couldn't see before. But how we respond to them, we can choose in a lot of ways. So it might be that with our parents falling ill, we can show up on weekends, or we can show up once a month, or we can decide to live in their house and support them all the time. Like, the way we respond to those environmental challenges are actually up to us, and it might feel like we don't have a choice, but if you have siblings, other people that can help you with those problems, you can also negotiate better solutions for all of you. So maybe you share the load, maybe you do a week on, a week off with another sibling, or maybe with your partner, with kids, you think about how, I could do 3 days a week, you do 4 days a week, or we shift around and support one another more with the cleaning and cooking around the house. We see no pink jobs or blue jobs, we see them as both being equal. And a lot of this has to start from the point of being living beyond labels. It's thinking, okay, there's no default assumption of how things should be designed. There's no way that it has to be because it's always been that way. It starts from a zero-based budgeting system, and then you add on ways that you want to show up intentionally afterwards. And if you do that with negotiated relationships with others, you can find that you can be a lot more intentional with your constraints, even when they're imposed on you.
How do you get to that zero-based budgeting mindset? Because there are certain things that we're just kind of, it feels like we're born with, we've inherited, and they're strong. We have strong beliefs around our roles, around our identity, around what it means to be X, or how you show up in a certain space. How do you get there?
Part of it is existing outside of an echo chamber. So sometimes these ideas might be reinforced through different parts, different societies, different social media channels that we're part of, and moving beyond them and seeing them as like, that's one way of showing up. It's not the only way we can show up. And it's also realizing that how we were yesterday might not be how we want to be tomorrow. And this idea of constant evolving and evolution, that's got to be at the starting point of all of this. And if you believe that you're always going to be changing, then you know that your opinions, while they might be strongly held, you can also able to negotiate them and change them over time as well. So you have to be able to be flexible with yourself, while also, yes, standing in what makes you unique and what is true to you, but also realizing that when you meet another person and you have a relationship with them, whether it's romantic, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a parental relationship, there's a negotiation there of different behaviors that are appropriate for both of you. And so you have to be open to that by default, and to find solutions that work for both of you in different scenarios. What worked for you now might be completely different in 10 years, and 15 years, and 20 years. And I think that that's ability to change is really fundamental to having long-lasting relationships with others, but also ways of showing up consistently for yourself.
Yeah, that flexibility is tough in the moment, especially if it's something that you feel very committed to. Like, I can imagine you did racing. You mentioned, actually, that you might have pushed yourself beyond capacity when you flew off a cliff. But tell me a little bit about maybe using that example or another example, differentiating between pushing yourself to that growth edge of something and recognizing, okay, wait, this isn't working for me. This isn't serving me and my goals.
Yeah, I will use the example because it's a good one. So in 2022, I went out in May to Mallorca and did a training camp with the triathlon club I was a part of. And they gave me, for the first time, a carbon bike. I've been training on an aluminium one all winter. And I got a little bit overconfident. And I decided that, I was pretty fit, so why not sped up the hills, and then decide to take the descents also pretty quick. But out there in Mallorca, you've got a lot of switchbacks, and so they're instantly turning back on themselves, and you have to be really quite good with how you're cycling in a very different environment to the UK. And I was overconfident, too cocky, and pushed myself a little bit too hard, particularly on the downhill, and then got to this point about 3 switchbacks in after 100k on the way up, and it'd been raining that day, leaves on the ground, went to hit the brakes, and the bike starts shaking. I'm like, ooh, okay, this is getting a bit dangerous. I squeeze it as hard as I can, and then I realize I have 2 decisions. I can either lean in to the ground and scrape my entire body, or I can hit the crash barrier and go over, and I decide on the latter. Hit the crash barrier, it's on this bridge that goes over this river below. I go over, bike stays on the bridge, and go down and hit this rock below. And then I'm like, ooh, okay, I'm conscious, so that's a good sign. I managed to pull myself up from this like little river below, up to the side of the mountainside, and then I'm with a team, so they will stop for me. Obviously, the ambulance comes and put me on morphine, take me down to the hospital, and they do all these X-rays, and they say to me, the only thing that's broken is your pinky finger. Everything else is fine. I did have lots of scars down my arms that I still have now, and my back was heavily bruised, but you'll heal. And so I had to prove to them that I could walk, and then I could basically chill the rest of the week on that holiday. I mean, chill, try and painfully sit down or lie down, and then just had to decide to myself, like, do I want to continue and do the race that's in about 60 days time, or do I defer it a year? And as I sat with that, I remember being like, I could just cross a line, I could get it done, do the achievement, why not? But actually, the right decision, the one I made, was to defer it by a year and to then, show up properly for it. And then did a whole, got a semi-pro, silver medalist at the Commonwealth Games, coach to help me. I mean, semi-pro. And then he designed the training plan for that year. That's where I went all in for that following year, and then basically was the fittest I'd ever been in 2023. I was getting running PBs or triathlon training, and I was then going out and doing sort of world champs as well as doing the Ironman UK. But I also remember crossing the line at the end of that Ironman, and I'd just done 11 hours that day. You're not allowed any earphones in either, so you have to be focused and present with it. And I crossed the line, and I'm like, what was the point in all this? Is this really worth it? And I think you get that a little bit after big achievements anyway. So I sort of told myself, it's the journey that matters. It's all about getting there in the end. But as I sat with it, I also started realizing that actually, I've traded off a lot of life for this, a lot of routine for the last 2 years that it's forced me into, and that I've actively chosen. But do I want more of this going forward? And at first I didn't learn my lesson. I decided that I couldn't resist signing up for the next thing because I already needed the next goal. I had to have this identity of being an athlete. So I then had to get the next race in, and I qualified for London Marathon, so why not do that? So I did that for the following year. And then after London Marathon, I didn't quite achieve the time I wanted to. It was then that something clicked where I was like, actually, let's not think about sport as it having to be a certain outcome. I don't require a result to be good at this thing. I can enjoy it for the sake of it, which when you've been competitive in a space is really hard to reframe. And so for me, what followed then was a period of, okay, I've got the next thing I want to do. Let's wait a little bit. Let's, sit with it. Let's feel out for what I want to do. And then decided to do an ultramarathon, which on paper maybe sounds like I'm just taking it to the next level. But actually the way I showed up for that ultra, I think really proved that I had a different mentality. So that was in May 2025. I'd done some training out in Valencia when I was writing the book. And when I did the ultra, I was about 89k into a race, which is a crazy statement to begin with, and pulled into this lakeside camp and fueled myself up, got loads of fuel. And I first remember like thinking to myself, wow, like my body, my heart rate is really high. I need to just chill out for a little bit. And I spoke to some of the medics and they said, yeah, you've just been pushing yourself too hard, like rest here a little while. And this is a race, yeah. I'm used to pushing myself. I'm used to like really trying to achieve what's possible. But I sat in that space, that area for about an hour and a half with my support team. And I just said to them, like, I wanted to sit here, take it all in, eat loads of fuel and just relax, make sure my body's okay before I push on. So I did that at 89k and then pushed on, came into the 113k mark, and that was the finish line. So I still managed to do that competitive side of me, of enjoying it, but how I showed up there of being able to listen to my body and take the time out and relax, that also showed that I could then involve this emotional side of myself as well that I hadn't given a lot of credit to before. Because that world of ultramarathoning isn't less about the time, it's more about finishing the race. That gave me the freedom to think beyond the label of a time and more about how I could show up more as me as a race.
So do you think you needed to go over that barrier? You needed that experience to then get you to the mentality and to the format that suited you better?
Yeah, I think you do have to see your limits and you do have to push yourself to them, because for myself, I wouldn't have known what I was capable of though I didn't have that first mindset of just 10 hours, 20 hours a week of different sports and doing sort of 12 different sessions a week as well. Like if I hadn't done that level of pushing myself, I wouldn't have known what I'm capable of before I could then apply the kind of consideration and the slowdown side too. So yeah, I think I needed the hard edge before I could know what my soft edge was.
That makes sense. And I'm assuming you took some of these learnings into how you approached the book. What are some of the things that you have taken from your experience over the last decade and applied to book writing?
So I think I was writing a piece on this actually, which will come out after this episode, but
oh, great.
It's about how I believe this is my best work I've ever created, the book. And I mean that like not lightly, I mean that with a lot of considered thought. And I think it has come from this process in this last year of I've seen myself before as this sort of 0 to 80 guy who could like take an idea from concept to first draft and be like, right, push it out in the world. Cool, I'll find the people that love the 80 to 100 and I'll let them handle the perfectionist bit. Like I didn't like being a perfectionist. I liked other people who were perfectionists who liked perfecting my ideas that I brought to life. And this journey of writing or creating a book, if I call it that more broadly, has forced me to become that 80 to 100 guy as well. And so I've seen the other side of this of when I got the first draft done, I was like, okay, cool, I think this is a good enough book, isn't it? Yeah, this is really good. And then I got the first sort of responses from community members and I was like, nah, like it's good, but it needs work. It really needs work. And that then started this whole journey of getting from version 1 to version 5 and each time improving it based on feedback from readers and getting to that point where I found the spine of the book, like the undefinable ascent was only the concept in version 4. And that, like, changing the way I'm seeing it of them being separate frameworks, but now being interconnected in this bigger story, and then being like, oh, I need illustrations here. Like, I could have chosen to not do illustrations. That was a cost that I could probably have spared myself. But no, it had to be at that point. I just knew that I wanted to create something great, not just something good enough. And so it then became a no-brainer. Again, with the cover design, I could have chosen to work with someone on Fiverr and, have it done by AI if I wanted to as well. But no, I went for a branding agency that knew a lot about wellness, yes, less about books, but I thought that their unique perspective would allow me to create something different. And I'm really happy with what we finally came to. And it feels like a very unique book that's true to me and reflects a lot of who I am within it, both in how it feels, but also obviously in the words that are written and then in the stories that are conveyed as well. So at the beginning, it was sort of my stories, my book about me and a lot of selfish intent perhaps. By the end, it was sort of our book about a few different people and the frameworks that affect us all and the lives that we all live. And that, for me, that journey of going from selfish, of just want a book because the sake of it, I've already written so much, I might as well create one, into, no, I actually want to publish a great book that can genuinely help people and is so valuable that they can't help but recommend it. Okay, let's focus on creating something great. And that has raised my standards infinitely. So I'd say the journey of writing a book has taken me from an amateur to becoming a pro in creating things that matter.
That's awesome. And it's interesting to see how kind of that selfish seed is what was the impetus for then creating something that goes so beyond you and that is for other people and that shifted the way that you crafted the book. And you still share stories about yourself because there is so much of your lived experience that informed the structures and the techniques in the book. But it is very much written for the reader, and it does read as such. And I love that you said that you feel more like a guide than a coach, and that you're not telling anyone what to do. You're giving them tools, techniques, and support to figure out what will work for them so that they can build something that they're happy with.
Yeah.
Speaking of happy days of childhood, what advice would you give younger Charlie, if you could?
So part of me would say that I wouldn't give any advice because the journey that he's about to embark on would teach him everything he needs to know, and that he wouldn't listen to me anyway if I tried. But if I was teaching a younger person who wasn't myself perhaps, then I would say to them to look for others who they can relate to on that deeper level. So yes, a part of you might be seen by the run club. Yes, a part of you might be seen by the book club and everything in between. But look for the people that can exist beyond those single identities. Look for those that exist in the grey, that can hold nuance and say one thing, but also understand that the other perspective is equally as valid. Look for them and find them and then hold on to them. And then you never know, with enough time, you might bring them together and create something very special for them as well.
Beautiful. And I love that your advice earlier around how do you change your mindset around something was get out of your echo chambers. So now the advice is create your environment in a way that supports growth.
Yeah.
Because we will likely fall into echo chambers because we get into hobbies, and then that's an echo chamber. We have interests, that's an echo chamber. Like our algorithms are echo chambers. So the two support each other very nicely. And by the time this comes out, as I said, the book will be out. So we'll drop the links for people to purchase and read in the show notes. But where is the main place that people should find you out on the internet?
Best place is undefinableLifeDesign.com. If you can't spell it, just search it. I'm sure it'll come up on Google.
I have a feeling that the audience of this show will be able to spell undefinable, and if not, there is ChatGPT, Google, and every other technology possible to figure it out. Charlie, thank you so much.
Thank you, I sure appreciate it.